Apache HTTP Server is configured by placing directives in plain text configuration files. The main configuration file is usually called httpd.conf. The location of this file is set at compile time, but may be overwritten at a later time if necessary. In addition, other configuration files may be added using the include directive, and wildcards can be used to include many configuration files. Any directive may be placed in any of these configuration files. Changes to the main configuration files are only recognized by httpd when it is started or restarted. The server also reads a file containing MIME document types. The file name is set by the types config directive and is MIME types by default. A client, that is a web browser, connects to a server, that is your Apache HTTP server, with a specified protocol and makes a request for a resource using the URL path. The URL path may represent any number of things on the server. It may be a file, like getting-started.html, a handler, like server status, or some kind of program file, like index.php. In order to connect to a server, the client will first have to resolve their server name to an IP address, the location on the internet where the server resides. Thus, in order for your web server to be reachable, it is necessary that the server name be in DNS. You may need to contact your network administrator or internet service provider to perform this step for you. More than one host name may point to the same IP address, and more than one IP address can be attached to the same physical server. Thus, you can run more than one website on the same physical server using a feature called virtual hosts. The server will send a response consisting of a status code and optionally a response body. The status code indicates whether the request was successful, and if not, what kind of error condition there was. This tells the client what if should do with the response, and if not, what kind of error condition there was. This tells the client what it should do with the response. Details of the transaction and any error conditions are written to this log file. Here is an example of a server setup on my computer using XAMPP. This is a good way to build and test your site before paying for monthly web hosting. If you are testing a server that is not internet accessible, you can put host names in your host file in order to do local resolution. For example, you might want to put a record in your host file to map a request for www.example.com to your local system for testing purposes. This entry would look like 127.0.0.1 www.example.com. A host file will probably be located at Eketera host or Windows Systems 32 drivers Eketera host. The Apache HTTP server is configured via simple text files. These files may be located in any of a variety of places, depending on how exactly you installed the server. The default configuration file is usually called httpd.conf. The location for this can vary in third-party distributions of the server. The configuration is frequently broken into multiple smaller files for ease of management. These files are loaded via the include directive. The names or locations of these subfiles are not magical and may vary greatly from one installation to another. Arrange and subdivide these files as it makes the most sense to you. If the file arrangement you have by default doesn't make sense to you, feel free to rearrange it. The server is configured by placing configuration directives in these configuration files. A directive is a keyword followed by one or more arguments that set its value. The server is configured by placing configuration directives in these configuration files. A directive is a keyword followed by one or more arguments that set its value. The configuration is frequently broken into multiple smaller files for ease of management. These files are loaded via the include directive. The names and locations of these subfiles are not magical and may vary greatly from one installation to another. Arrange and subdivide these files as makes the most sense to you. If the file arrangement you have by default doesn't make sense to you, feel free to rearrange it. The question of where should I put that directive is generally answered by considering where you want a directive to be effective. If it is a global setting, it should appear in the configuration file outside of any directory, location, virtual host, or other section. If it is to apply only to a particular directory, then it should go inside a directory section referring to that directory, and so on. In addition to the main configuration files, certain directives may go in .htaccess files located in the content directories. .htaccess files are primarily for people who do not have access to the main server configuration files. httpd allows for decentralized management of configuration via special files placed inside the web tree. The special files are usually called .htaccess, but any name can be specified in the access file name directive. Directives placed in .htaccess files apply to the directory where you place the file and all subdirectories. The .htaccess files follow the same syntax as the main configuration files. Since .htaccess files are read on every request, changes made in these files take immediate effect. htaccess files, or distributed configuration files, provide a way to make configuration changes on a per-directory basis. A file containing one or more configuration directives is placed in a particular document directory, and the directives apply to that directory and all subdirectories thereof. You should avoid using .htaccess files completely if you have access to httpd.main server config files. Using .htaccess files slows down your Apache HTTP Server. Any directive that you can include in a .htaccess file is better set in a directory block, as it will have the same effect with better performance. httpd configuration files contain one directive per line. The backslash may be used as the last character on a line to indicate that the directive continues onto the next file. httpd configuration files contain one directive per line. The backslash may be used as the last character on a line to indicate that the directive continues onto the next line. There must be no other characters or white space between the backslash and the end of the line. Arguments to directives are separated by white space. If an argument contains spaces, you must include that argument in quotes. Directives in the configuration files are case insensitive, but arguments to directives are often case sensitive. Lines that begin with the hash character are considered comments and are ignored. Comments may not be included on the same line as a configuration directive. Whitespace occurring before a directive is ignored, so you may indent directives for clarity. Blank lines are also ignored. Directives placed in the main configuration files apply to the entire server. If you wish to change the configuration for only a part of the server, you can scope your directives by placing them in directory, directory match, files, files match, location, and location match sections. These sections limit the application of the directives, which they enclose, to particular file systems, locations, or URLs. They can be nested, allowing for very fine-grained configuration, and httpd has the capability to serve many different websites simultaneously. This is called virtual hosting. Directives can also be scoped by placing them inside virtual host sections. so that they will only apply to requests for a particular website. Although most directives can be placed in any of these sections, some directives do not make sense in some contexts. For example, directives controlling process creation can only be placed in the main server context. Website content can take many different forms, but may broadly be divided into static and dynamic content. Static content are things like HTML files, image files, CSS files, and others that reside in the file system. The document root directive specifies where in your file system you should place these files. This directive is either set globally or per virtual host. Look in your configuration files to determine how this is set for your server. Typically, a document called index.html will be served when a directory is requested without a file name being specified. For example, if document root is set to var www HTML and a request is made for http://www.example.com/work, the file var www.html work index.html will be served to the client. Dynamic content is anything that is generated at request time and may change from one request to another. There are numerous ways that dynamic content may be generated. Various handlers are available to generate content. CGI programs may be written to generate content for your site. Your most valuable assets are the log files, and, in particular, the error log. Troubleshooting any problem without the error log is like driving with your eyes closed. The location of the error log is defined by the error log directive, which may be set globally or per virtual host. Entries in the error log tell you what went wrong and when. They often also tell you how to fix it. Each error log message contains an error code, which you can search for online for even more detailed descriptions of how to address the problem. You can also configure your error log to contain a log ID, which you can then correlate to any access log entry so that you can determine what request caused the error condition.